Hi everyone, Heather here with Astrology with Heather.com, and I am back finally with Robert Phoenix after taking another month off with all of the chaos. Welcome back, Robert.
Hey, thanks, Heather. It's great to be back, and I'm glad that they let me out so I could be with you today. It's really it's a great pleasure to hang out with you.
Well, it's awesome to be back doing this again. I'm sure that our viewers definitely missed this because we had a crazy month last month with Saturn and Pluto stationing to go retrograde, and the squares from the full moons, the new moons, the sun, and all of that highlighting the craziness. I mean, it was really a hard month for a lot of people, and we saw what was really going on a global scale. There was a lot happening. We had Julian Assange being arrested and extradited. We had the whole vaccine thing exploding, which you predicted back in October of last year, and our astro navigation of 2019 is when we really first started talking about that. Mm-hmm. And so you were spot on. That exploded, with the Mercury retrograde, and then with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction starting to come exact. And there's a lot going on. There's shootings and bombings and churches burning down, and it was just a huge month. I feel like maybe we should talk a little bit about that before we get into what's going on this month, which is so much nicer. It's like a huge sigh of relief coming for the month of May. But it's kind of like the calm after the big storm. Like we're going to be picking up the pieces, I feel like.
Right. So this is just a kind of a bit of a warning for those of you who have a problem with politics. You may want to fast forward for the next 5 minutes because we will touch on some of the geopolitical aspects that do relate to astrology. Okay, so it's not just politics for the sake of politics. So there's your disclaimer. Yeah, and also another disclaimer: Assange has just been basically told that he's going to be spending the next 50 months in a UK jail. So he hasn't been extradited yet. He's still going to be on ice in the UK. And that's for basically not following the rules of a warrant. Of course, that was set out after Assange with that whole kind of deal with the two women from Sweden. Anyway, so before anything happens in the U.S., he's going to spend another year in the U.K. So that's your Julian Assange update. And the Julian Assange event sort of kickstarted kind of everything in a lot of ways, right? I mean, we started off with this, and it was headed right into the Easter week, and you were picking up on some of this stuff with the Reformation and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and then going back even further, the previous Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is around like I think it was like 595 80 or something like that. It was really early on. That every time one of these Saturn-Pluto conjunctions happens, there's something fairly tumultuous that takes place with the culture, okay? And of course, with Martin Luther and the Reformation, we had the splitting of the Christian atom and creating a huge division in the House of Christianity. And if you go back to that other date that I was talking, I think it was 565 or 559, 560, right around there. That's when the first copy of the Talmud is actually created. So that happens on that previous Saturn-Pluto conjunction.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that I think people need to understand is that with Saturn-Pluto being conjunct, that we're dealing with the end of this kind of 10th house Capricornian sort of, how do I say this, cultural kind of appropriation. It is over, right? It's coming to an end. And what's happening is that we're being basically readied and massaged and tenderized for whatever version of the Aquarian age is just kind of hanging out there for us to step into, right? The new sets, the new theater, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, smart green cities. This is the model of the new world. And so for the new world to come into play, or for the new world to be initiated, the old world has to die. Theoretically, it has to die. So what we're witnessing is we are witnessing the death throes and the spasms of really the last 2,000 years. Now, some of that is kind of a function of an amalgamation of events, right? And some of those events could be very questionable on some level, but nonetheless, it's like one of the events that's not questionable is the amount of debt that has been accrued, right? So the debt for this country alone, the United States, is in the trillions, trillions of dollars of debt, okay? At some point, even though it seems like a phantom number, that's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with and that the world will have to deal with. It's not just the U.S. that's in debt. You know, the amalgamation of debt on a planetary scale essentially means that money game is going to come to an end. And the last 2,000 years have been erected on that money game. Okay, so that's one thing that we have to take into account. And then what's happening with a lot of the other stuff that's being sort of, how do I say this without offending too many people, manufactured. I think a lot of our reality is manufactured, and I think we can see it. We can actually see it when it comes to the big picture, mundane astrology, which is what we talk about here. So a lot of stuff has happened, and the Assange event was a trigger. It's a major trigger. And then that Sunday, I began to look I did my Sunday night show, and I was looking at this, at the week ahead. And I'm like, this is going to be a crazy week. Like, it's going to be nuts. And culminating in that Sun-Uranus conjunction, which is going to happen on Easter Sunday. And what happened the next day, Notre Dame, went up in smoke. Right, Notre Dame was on fire, and I mean there was a whole litany of things that happened that week, crazy stuff, and of course it culminated with the mass bombings in Sri Lanka of the churches, right? And that was on the Sun-Uranus conjunction, which was explosive. And I said Easter Sunday is going to be explosive, and it was very explosive. And if you follow a lot of these events, and you really follow the events, and you stare down into them, there's some interesting clues that are kind of these leave behinds at times. I was thinking about this today, the shooting in Christchurch, right, at the mosque, all this ties into the Jupiter Neptune square, which we can talk about, in the three big religions, the three big Abrahamic faiths. But that last song that was playing on Brandon Tarrant's, CD player, whatever, in his car, is I Am the God of Hell, Fire, Fire by Arthur Brown, right? That's the last song that you hear, and then what happens? We have the fire in Notre Dame not too long after that, right? So there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening. A lot of it, I have to say, is pretty dark. We're in a dark phase right now. I don't think there's any disputing it. How we interpret it, how we deal with it, how we live with it, that's a whole other thing. And obviously, astrology is a great guide, and we can dive into some of that here today. So how did you see the last couple of weeks?
Well, it was really interesting, actually, because I all of a sudden started looking into that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and you mentioned how I was connecting it to the Protestant Reformation. I wrote a little article about it for the first time in ages, because this conjunction is in my third house, and I was like really intense. I even spent my Friday night watching documentaries about Martin Luther, and the connections between what was going on then and what's going on now are just insane. You look at things like, the Catholic Church back then was the biggest hierarchy, the biggest power structure of that time. It had control over everyone, and it was super, super corrupt. It still is. And, it was completely dismantled and completely disassembled by Martin Luther and his 95 Theses that he nailed to the door of the church, right? And the only reason that document had an impact was because of the invention of the printing press. And that was actually the first mass media, widely distributed writing from the printing press, because it was so, exciting for people to read, and it was really saying what other people were already thinking but afraid to say. And so it became very popular. And so we think about what's going on now, and we have very similar things going on with the internet, right? Because of the internet, WikiLeaks can exist. Because of the internet, people can take the power to decide for themselves about medical decisions, vaccinations, other issues in their lives, based on actual research done by scientists that's available, widely distributed on the internet. And so the control system is being undermined again, but now the control system is no longer the church, although the church has been a big thing with all the burning of the churches and the bombings and all of that. It's just so interesting, the parallels, because now it's being undermined again by another form of mass media. And the Saturn, not Saturn, the Jupiter Neptune square going on in Sagittarius and Pisces at the same time as all of this, that's made it like doubly interesting, right? Because
Absolutely.
we've had some really crazy stuff going on. And I just I talked with my friend on my channel about the Catholic Church and the dismantling of the Catholic Church and pedophilia, and how some of this Catholic stuff is coming back around again. And then the church burns down, right? Notre Dame. And you pointed out in one of your, I think it was your 15 Minutes of Flame, there's a cover up of the fact that a lot of churches in all throughout Europe, but especially in Paris and in France, were being desecrated and damaged in a lot of different ways. They were being attacked also. Right. And so there was that clip, I wish we could play it again, where it was like a cardinal from the United States, right?
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was on a radio show, and they kept cutting him off when he was talking about, well, look at all these churches being desecrated here, and then Notre Dame burns down, and they kept cutting him off, and the guy just hung up on him.
Yeah, the guy that you're referring to is Neil Cavuto, who was on Fox.
Okay.
And Neil is a dyed-in-the-wool Jesuit. He went to a number of Jesuit colleges, and so you would think that perhaps being a Jesuit, he might have some sympathy for the cardinal's slightly more informed opinion than his, but he didn't. And it seems to me that there's kind of this rift taking place inside of the church between the Jesuits and perhaps some other orders inside the church. And, are the Jesuits, involved in dismantling of the church itself? There's a lot of infighting going on, and kind of a lot of micro-fractional kinds of factions beginning to sort of take place. And it's very interesting to sit back and watch in a lot of ways. But what's happening with the church, with a lot of other things, right? Because one of the things that's really starting to become a hot button issue is how people are dealing with Israel's participation in this government, and not only this government, but governments all around the world. And of course, there's a big BDS movement that's taking place. People want to divest because they don't like how the Israelis are treating the Palestinians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's become a big issue. And there's this undercurrent now on YouTube where people are starting to talk about the influence of Israel in Jewish power. And this is a really big deal right now. And one of the things that's happening around this is that all of a sudden we're starting to get more language, more talk, and more chatter around anti-Semitic and anti-hate speech laws, okay? This relates to Jupiter retrograde in Sagittarius. Now, there are two things that we know about Sagittarius. Number one, it's expansive. It wants to be involved in this quest for truth, authenticity. It wants to get to it, right? The other hand, Sagittarius can be rather dogmatic, and it can be really self-righteous. And so what we're watching now, especially with the retrograde and that square with Neptune, is we're watching this fight for the mind share around truth. Who can define what it is? What are the rules of engagement? Do we have freedom of speech? Is freedom of speech trumped by special interest groups or groups of people who believe that free speech engenders some kind of radical or terrorist behavior in people? This is the front lines right now. And the Jupiter square with Neptune and the Jupiter retrograde piece is really big.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also interesting how that ties back to not only what you were just talking about, but going back to the vaccine thing. A lot of what's been under attack lately are religious exemptions and religious, and philosophical reasoning behind not getting vaccinated. And so that goes back to that religious, ideological, philosophical, Sagittarian type of energy that's being squared with Neptune right now. There's a lot of confusion and cloudiness around what constitutes a religious exemption. Should the state have control over whether or not, your religious beliefs are valid and true? Like, should the state get to validate that and decide that for you? Should religious exemptions be a thing? Like it's like all about religion. And even in the communities where they've had the the issues with the vaccination where they're either trying to ban children from public spaces, or they're trying to fine people excessive amounts of money for not being vaccinated and living in a certain area. These are primarily religious communities that they're targeting. They're Orthodox Jewish communities that they're targeting. And so again, it goes back to religion.
Right, absolutely. And yeah, so what's happening there? What's happening there is the installment of a new religion, right? Science.
Yeah.
That route, you know, so it's like, well, these are the scientific facts, and your religion, your beliefs, they don't really matter. Not in this arena. Well, you can say, well, we've got our own science. No, sorry, that doesn't count. You know, your science is wrong. Your science is fallacious. You know, go tell that to somebody who has a vaccine-injured child. Go sit in front of them and tell them that what they have found out on, you know, through hours and hours of research, that they're patently wrong. Okay, good luck with that. Let's see how that goes. I mean, you're right. I mean, this is where it's at right now, and this is a really critical time. It is a really, really critical time. You know, I was this morning, somebody sent me this this link to a story about, you know, who is the most dangerous person on the planet. And the description of the most dangerous person on the planet was a white middle-class mother who shops at Whole Foods and doesn't want to vaccinate their child.
What?
Yes. That this is the new face of terrorism, right? Now, it was coming from a periodical, an online publication, where they were trying to support basically being an informed mom, right? Mm-hmm. So what they were doing is they were positing the case from the other side, right? And when they did that, they made a pretty good case that this is theoretically based on what you just said, that this is a dangerous person, that this is a dangerous type, and the reason why they're dangerous is because, well, they don't fall into or ascribe to, you know, what we would consider to be a terror threat. But that's what's going on right now. This brings it back into astrology and that wash with Neptune, right? The Neptunian wash with Pisces. It's going to mix everything up. It's going to change everything around. And all of a sudden, you know, out the other side, you know, we go in. It's really interesting, right? You go back and you look at where Jupiter was in Sagittarius. You know, Jupiter was in Sagittarius, you know, I'm sorry, Pluto was in Sagittarius during 9/11.
Yeah.
Right. That was a Pluto Sagittarian time. And what was happening then? Well, what was happening then was these mega churches were huge, right? And George Bush was riding on the coattails of the mega church. That's how he got elected. And then, of course, we have 9/11. And what's the big thing that comes out of 9/11? Well, that, you know, Islam is enemy number one, right? Well, let's fast forward this from 2002 to 2019, 17 years. Neptune's been in Pisces since 2011, right? So that's 8 years of Neptune in Pisces. And at the other end, who's the most dangerous person on the planet? It's the middle-class mom shopping at Whole Foods. So we've gone from the turban-wearing terrorist, you know, who supposedly blew up the Twin Towers at 9/11, and with the heavy Neptune effect of the last 8 years, now it's a mom shopping at Whole Foods. There you go. This is what happens when you get a heavy dose of Neptune. And Neptune, remember, we just came through Saturn and Sagittarius, and Neptune was squaring that Saturn as well. So between Saturn and Jupiter, you know, we have really been in this deep wash of what's real, what's true, what's not, and who the bad guys are. Starts off with terrorists. Now it's mom shopping at Whole Foods. Well, welcome to 2019.
So that kind of ties in with the North Node being in the sign of Cancer, right? Because something that I've noticed is moms are becoming more and more empowered and more outspoken, trying to protect their children and protect their rights around their children. And even like going back to my friends from high school, who I never would have thought who would think in these types of ways. I would think that would be very mainstream and very in the matrix and all of that. They're starting to speak out, and they're starting to say, hey, like, you know, vaccines have actual safety concerns. Like, they're not safe and effective when there's side effects and dangers that are listed on the vaccine insert that they admit exist, you know. So you're doing a risk when you're doing this, and we should have a choice in that matter. And seeing people who never would have spoken out about that, who are now mothers and who are now actually doing their research, really intelligent. It's like you said, it's highly educated, more well-off, like affluent mothers who have good jobs, who have good paychecks, who have higher education, usually beyond even college degrees.
Right.
These are the ones that are doing the research, and they know how to do the research. That's the other thing. And that's going to be, I think, another thing that's going to be targeted, because when you do postgraduate education, you learn in most areas, not every area, but you learn how to read peer-reviewed research, how to critically analyze peer-reviewed research, how to put it together, how to look at what's a good study and what's a bad study. And, people are doing this for themselves and using that to care for themselves and their families, instead of using it for what they were instructed to use it for, which is to put your head down, do the research, and fall in line with what the past research conclusions state. And you're right, that's like the dangerous. It makes complete sense. And then the other thing too is when we had the North Node in Leo, what was being sort of villainized were like the king, the emperor. Donald Trump was like kind of the big thing, and so looking at that being sort of the thing that was demonized, that was sort of being elevated at the same time. Now we have mothers that are being elevated, being empowered at the same time as they're being demonized.
Right, absolutely. It's the same kind of effect, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you look at the back end of that Leo was obviously the South Node in Aquarius.
Yeah.
And Aquarius's job is to destroy things. I mean, that's what Aquarius is here to do. It's like, let's blow this up because I got a better idea, right? This is the new thing, right? That's what Aquarius is about. Mm-hmm. So while, it's this real interesting kind of dynamic with the oppositions. And I think in some ways they're kind of important, right? There can be an interesting check and balance with the opposition. But at the same time, if one of those oppositions gets to become too, whoa.
All right.
That was intense. Does the mailman still have his leg?
I'm not sure what's going on.
Man.
Sorry.
Note to people watching this video, do not trespass at Heather's place.
Yes.
You'll lose your body part. You'll lose a body part. Is your dog a male or female?
I have two. I have a little boy and a big, female.
That's the one we just heard was the big female, right?
Yeah, she has the screechy bark, like she's screaming.
Right. So that was interesting. She's like, yeah, big female. Anyway, the oppositions are important, right? So we've got the South Node in Capricorn. And what is Capricorn? It's the government. Right, it's the government, it's big business, it's the quote unquote oligarchs, and what are they trying to do? They're trying to set down the rules now. It's like you can't go out of your house because you have measles, right? That's the South Node in Capricorn. The true node in Cancer are the mothers that are going through this. Like, people have had measles before. It's not like this is the end of the world. It's not like we're going to die. This is not the bubonic plague. And this is the dance that we're in now. And it's really, really interesting. So you're absolutely right. We're going to have this vision of mothers of nurturing and, the essence, the soul of femininity, which is, by the way, in men too. Men nurture, right? Men nurture, men love, we do these things too. And this is what's being elevated. And at the same time, you're absolutely right. Women are in the crosshairs at the same time. It's a fascinating time we live in.
Yeah.
And we're really, 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 like, the next 2 years with Saturn and Pluto, this is it. I mean, we are on the vapors of the 20th century and industrialization. And once Saturn moves into Aquarius and once Pluto moves into Aquarius, it is a brave new world. So right now is where things are being either fought for, negotiated, let go of, held on to. These next 2 years are critical and vital for everybody, not just the quote-unquote world, because these things have ramifications inside of us. And I know people like when we talk about the personal stuff, so maybe we can talk about it on a personal level, like how it affects us. Yeah.
Well, we got to get into the astrology for this month too. We're just talking about everything that's been going on and that's kind of going on generally. So yeah, let's move into the more personal stuff. And kind of get away from, you know, it's probably going to be like a video that I post on my channel that's going to have one of those Encyclopedia Britannica things underneath. Vaccines are the greatest health
Right.
invention of all times or something. I'm not saying, by the way, for people who are watching this, that nobody should have vaccines or that, you know, no Western medicine is completely irrelevant or anything like that. My husband's an ER nurse. You know, we believe that allopathic medicine has its place. I just believe that you should be able to make an informed decision, and that's not the case right now. And that's where we're at, right? Because there are risks to vaccines and there are potential benefits too. There's both sides. And so I think people need to be able to have the ability to weigh the options and to make decisions for themselves. I mean, that's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. I think it's a basic right that everyone should have and that we have had up until now. So, so that's kind of where I'm at with that. So just to calm the comment section a little bit here.
You could direct all your heat towards me. I'll take it.
Yeah, just yell at Robert. No, don't do that. But I mean, anyway, so let's get into how this is affecting people more on an individual level, and we can kind of start talking about what's going on this month, because I really think this is going to be a month where people are going to have a little bit of time to just kind of decompress and pick up the pieces, because so many people, I don't know about you and your clients, but so many people have been coming to me having these really difficult, terrible, like crazy circumstances, and they feel stuck. They feel like they can't get out of it. They feel afraid. They don't know what to do. And I really feel like with all the trines coming this month, because last month we had squares to Saturn and Pluto in the South Node, I think the trines coming this month are going to help people to see the light at the end of the tunnel and see what they're deconstructing and why, and what they can start to build from it. I don't think it's going to solve everything, but I think people will get a better sense of perspective. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I think we're living in a time of great chaos and instability, and it's reflected in the world around us. Like it seems like every other day there's some kind of event where, you know, if you have a drip line to mass media, you're just going to be completely freaked out 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, people need some real solid survival and thrival skills to get through the times we're in. And I think astrology is a great way to personalize kind of where we are in the universe and how, you know, we can get better and stay in our game and actually improve our lives. So I think you're completely right. You know, there's a lot of retrograde happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting ready for, you know, both Saturn and Pluto to go retrograde. I think Pluto's getting ready to station, right? I mean, it's kind of where we are. And then Jupiter's retrograding. And the Jupiter retrograde, I think, is important.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's in a really important retrograde. And one of the things you can do with Jupiter retrograde, at least this is how I see it, right, is like Jupiter wants to expand, wants to get bigger, you know, wants more. But with a retrograde, you got to figure out what you need to let go of or how you can declutter in order to bring more space in, right? So it's not quite a Saturnian effect. But if you want more, go back and figure out how you can, you know, either redo something, let go of some things, restructure, reorder, so you can, you know, when Jupiter goes forward, breathe new life into whatever it is that you're doing. So it's not really an expansive time with Jupiter retrograde. What it is kind of revisioning and revamping how you would like to expand, right? And I think it's really important. And with the square to Neptune, one of the things that we have to watch out for is pessimism. I think we've got to be really clear that you know, even though things might be falling apart on some level, right, theoretically, if you look around the world, it's in chaos. That's just one part of the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we are not of this world. Like, you know, we're in this world but not of it. So there are things that we can do personally, our own personal growth, our own path, that in a lot of ways doesn't have to do with the world. So this is a really interesting time, because Jupiter and Neptune also get into the deep spiritual, religious, and philosophical components as to who we are and how we come up with models of living. Because theoretically, that's what Jupiter and Sagittarius, or Sagittarius in general, is supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
The ninth house is about models of living. This is how you live. These are your sacred laws. These are your sacred texts. And if you follow them, guess what? You get a nice little pat on the shoulder, and you'll have a nice place in the afterlife, and life goes much better for you, right? So there's some deconstruction with that going on, but I think this is a time where people have to really dig in and find out, you know, what's true for them and how they're going to have a deeper spiritual / religious kind of model moving forward. Because I can tell you right now, if you don't have it moving forward, the world is going to get more difficult, more and more difficult. So that's my 2 cents around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes hand in hand with like a Sagittarius keyword, which is integrity, right? So looking at how are you living your life and whether or not it's in alignment with your integrity.
Yeah.
And that's something I've been talking about in my weekly forecast for people too, because I think that's really important right now. If you're restructuring your life, as we all are in some area, we're going through this deconstruction, reconstruction phase, getting rid of oppressive energies with that Saturn-Pluto conjunction. What are you going to reconstruct? Is it going to be something that's going to be in alignment with the rules and the regulations and just more oppressive energy? Or are you going to align yourself with your integrity and something that feels good to you and that feels true to you, your moral and ethical value systems? So yeah, that's exactly what I've been saying.
Well, I think you're spot on. And the thing I really like about the Jupiter-Saturn kind of combo, right, is that Jupiter can be really enthusiastic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once Jupiter moves forward and you know, really picks up steam, you know, like around September, October, gets into those, you know, final degrees in some ways, right? That allows us to get really enthusiastic. And Saturn is there to allow us to put things into place, right? We have the form, we have the function with Saturn. So the Jupiter-Saturn kind of combo actually works. And then, you know, moving forward, you know, in December, when Jupiter finally moves out of Sagittarius and we get Jupiter in Capricorn, that's when it all theoretically, you know, comes together. But now's a really good time, you know, for people to get in touch with what they feel passionate about and then figure out the form for that to take place.
Absolutely. And so I feel like that brings us to the new moon. You want to jump into that?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, because this new moon in Taurus, which is happening on Saturday, is actually quite nice. So we have the new moon at 14 degrees in the sign of Taurus. We're about to have Mercury. Mercury is actually going to be in a nice trine with Jupiter still on that day, but Mercury is going to come into a conjunction with Uranus, which I actually like that energy. I feel like that's like genius energy. It's like bursts of inspiration, like these downloads and visions and these like really intense insights that can come in as a part of this new moon, but really into the entire week of after the new moon, we're going to be having that energy. And even the new moon, it's aspected pretty nicely. It's a wide trine with Saturn and Pluto. It's not as close as the full moon will be, which is also a nice energy. But I feel like this is it's like getting back to our comfort zones with Taurus and focusing on what's tangible, what's physical, what's here and now, instead of focusing on these crises that are going on more on a mental plane with Pluto, you know, being involved with that, more like psychological, emotional crises that have to do with that deconstruction phase that we're in. Instead of focusing on that, it's like, what's going on really right now? Like what can I feel? What can I taste? What can I touch? How can I go out in nature and experience something in a sensory way? How can I slow things down and ground myself again and get back to my roots after this period of, you know, flux and chaos?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. And I really like that moon conjunction. It's wide, obviously, with Uranus, 11 degrees. Some would say, well, that's not really conjunction. I would say it kind of is. It's just a really wide conjunction. And to me, this is like, you know, this is like the radical mother. You know, this is like, you know, the mom who is experimental, the mom who wants to take a different path, right? So if you are a mom and you are concerned about things like vaccinations or the effects of high frequency bandwidth on your children or fluoridation in your water, genetically modified foods, this is a time where you can get really switched on with that new moon in Taurus, of course Uranus there. And I also really like the trine from Jupiter to Mercury. That's another really fantastic aspect for generating new ideas, new insights, new creativity. And Taurus wants to put things into form, right? Taurus is not like Libra. I love Libra. You know, I love all the signs, but Libra is not always concerned with putting things into form. Libra's about ideas. And Taurus wants to touch things. It wants to taste things. It wants to build things. So this is a really great full moon to put like inspirational, experimental, radical new ideas into form. And because we're dealing with Taurus, it's very feminine. Yeah, I like it. I think it's a really, really nice full new moon. We got, we've got some issues going on with Saturn and the square to Mercury, and Saturn and kind of a square to Venus. Like, to me, like, if you have a good idea, those squares are like, well, you got to fight for it, right? You got to state your case. You got to, and Aries wants to move ahead, right? Wants to move ahead, wants to do things. Saturn says, pump the brakes. So here, it's a really interesting energy with, okay, I've got a good idea. Okay, well, prove it to me. Show it to me, right? Okay. Slow the Mercury and Aries down and methodically, step by step. So let's say, for instance, you are somebody. Let's say you are a woman and you become a woke mother, and you've seen the light around vaccines, and you really, really want to tell people that might be resistant to your ideas or resistant to your research. With a Mercury-Saturn square, slow it down. Don't try to force it, right? That's what you want to do, which gets back to what you were saying. Slow things down and find a methodical approach, while at the same time trying to integrate this really high sort of mental energy that's going on at that time. I love this new moon. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really powerful, and really, I think it's going to be a pleasant experience for a lot of people. There's not a lot of craziness or chaos going on. We're just kind of coming off of that Neptune-Mars square, but that actually happened, I think, like last weekend. So that energy is still there, but it's not super intense anymore. And so this is us kind of leaving the phase of intensity. It's still there. Saturn and Pluto are barely moving. They're still really close. The South Node's still involved, but it's definitely not as intense. It feels like it's like we can relax a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too, and I really do like that Uranus. It's wide. It's not like classically conjunct, but it's in the conversation, right? It's in the same sign, it's in the conversation. I think it's great. I'm a little, I still am a little concerned about that Mars Neptune square. I mean, I know Mars is moving on. It's within a 4-degree orb. If Mars was in a different sign, let's say Mars was in, I'd be even happier like a Mars opposition with Neptune, but it's in Gemini.
Yeah.
And that Mars in Gemini is really restless. In Gemini, we get kind of multiple kinds of, varieties of reality and expression. And while that's not necessarily bad, it's kind of like a hall of mirrors in some ways. I still have a little bit of kind of yellow flag, around this Mars-Neptune square. Also, that Mars in conjunct with Pluto, that's another thing that's got me a little, like, I wouldn't say apprehensive, but I'm paying attention to it, right? Yeah. It's like, because Mars represents guns and violence, and there's been a lot of gunplay in the news, right? And what does Saturn represent? It represents the government, represents these ruling bodies that are summarily making decisions about vaccines. And that's vaccines. That's the front line of the human experience and consent and choice. Here with this in conjunct, they're dealing with this Mars issue, and then Pluto, which is even closer in that in conjunct. I don't know. I feel like that there's some energy around this that is, let's just say, I think certain people would be more than willing to take advantage of a crisis. Let's put it that way. That's how I see this energy.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there is a lot of good vibes. There's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of novelty. There's a lot of snap, crackle, and pop here. There's a lot of wanting to bring things into form. And it's almost like we have two realities going on at the same time.
Yeah.
That's how I see this, Like, there's one reality that says, look, the world could be a really cool place. Right? That's one reality. Like, if we go down this path, it could be really, really cool. We could work together. We could pull together. We could have a more kind of holistic relationship with nature and our bodies and this wonderful symbiosis. And then there's this other path, which is, just look, shut the F up. We know what we're doing. Follow our rules, right? And this version of the world would be much better for you. This is kind of what it feels like. And it feels like we're going to get a bit of a harbinger of what I think is the world to come, which is about a split. I think we're going to be dealing with a split at some point in our culture and in the not so distant future. And I think we're going to get a window into what that split might look like. And people go, well, what world do I want to be a part of? Do I want to be a part of a world where there's more autonomy and choice? Or do I want to be a part of a world where there's less autonomy and choice and more rules and regulations? And I may feel more safe in that world. This other world may feel less safe, but I may have more say. And I think that's where this is headed. I can see this here.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think you're absolutely right. That Mars is actually highlighting a lot of everything that we've just been talking about for the first half of this video. It's coming into an exact opposition with Jupiter, actually, the day after the new moon.
Oh, interesting.
And
that's
so
right.
that is really strong, and it's highlighting that T-square, and it's highlighting the square between Jupiter and Neptune, and it's highlighting that Pluto conjunction to Saturn with the in conjunction going on there. So absolutely, I think there could be something going on around that time related to literally everything we were just talking about. But with Mars, you know, Mars does have that association with violence. It does have that association with aggression.
Yep.
It's the sign of Gemini, which has an association with deception and sort of different. It's like that thing that you always talk about with like the 9/11, right? There's like two different things going on here. It's like a split.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Well, hopefully that Taurus will help to ground the energy. I think it will, in terms of just us feeling a little bit better and maybe a little bit safer. But yeah, this new moon with that Mars is very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, Will Smith has a new movie out called Gemini Man. And I think it's going to come out with Mars when Mars is in Gemini here.
Oh,
I don't know if you've seen the trailer for it yet.
No.
Oh, yeah. So basically, it's kind of one of these futuristic sci-fi dystopian thrillers, right? And there are two Will Smiths, and you see it in the trailer. I'm not doing any spoilers or anything, but it seems to me like he's fighting against himself, right? Like there's a young version of him and there's an old version of him, and they're involved in this, like, I don't know, some kind of conflict. So it's called Gemini Man, and I think it's coming out with Mars and Gemini, which is interesting, right? It's totally interesting.
That is interesting. Well, so the new moon might be a little bit more intense than what I initially thought, but
no, I don't want to rain on the parade. I think it's I think there's a lot of great stuff there.
Well, and then as we come into the following week, I mean, the sun is going to trine Saturn and Pluto, and Venus will sextile Mars. Venus will trine Jupiter. So it'll start to turn into, I think, a little bit of a nicer. Is Venus trining Jupiter? That's not correct. Venus is squaring Pluto, actually. That's not what's happening. Venus trines Jupiter later on. I don't know.
I don't want to sound like Daddy Downer, but I just see there's like really great stuff here. Right.
Yeah.
Great stuff in this new moon. And at the same time, there's some other things happening that are, that are basically, illustrating or offering up kind of an alternate reality.
Yeah. I think if you're paying attention to the news and what's going on the outside, you're going to be in this reality with the T-square. And if you're just kind of at home, spending time in nature, in your garden, just relaxing and wanting to get down a bit, I think you might be experiencing more of this reality, unless you're somebody who's being hit really hard by this T-square. I mean,
I think we all need to go to Colorado and hang out with you and the chickens.
Yeah. You're all welcome here.
Let's all hang out at Heather's on the new moon.
We'll go hike in the mountains. We'll feed baby goats. It'll be great. Well, okay, so let's kind of move on to the full moon, because that's I think a nicer energy, even more so than the new moon is. So we have here, we have a full moon happening in the sign of Scorpio. I know the moon's technically at its fall in Scorpio, but it's a really nice, really positive looking full moon. I mean, we have this really nice sextile between Saturn, Pluto, and the South Node going on here, and a really nice trine between the Sun and Mercury, which are in a conjunction on the opposite end. So the Mercury's combust, which is kind of, but for the most part, I think this is actually a really nice full moon energy. I don't see anything that's super concerning in here. That opposition between Jupiter and Mars is definitely letting up quite a bit, and Mars is actually going to be in a really nice sextile with Venus and Uranus, which are in a conjunction, which I actually kind of like when when things conjunct Uranus. I like Uranus energy. It's like chaos, but in a positive way when you have the benefic planets involved.
Right. Yeah. Well, I agree. I totally agree. And the moon in Scorpio put the sex in sextile, that's for sure. You know, you got a nice sextile with Pluto and Saturn. You know, I mean, to me, that's like eroticism that has a place to go. You know what I mean? It's like eroticism that has kind of a container. You know, it becomes, you know, grounded and real, and I like it. I like it a lot. You know, when you get into sex, is powerful. You know, sex is a powerful kind of state. You know, and with the sextile to Saturn and Pluto, that Scorpio moon is really, really grounded. And it's not just about sex. You know, moon in Scorpio is about desire. Mm-hmm. It's about emotional desire. It's about manifestation. And if you are Scorpio rising, or you got moon in Scorpio, or your sun in Scorpio, part of your life lesson is how to deal with manifestation, right? You've got Pluto on your ascendant. You know all about this, right? That's a big lesson for you in this lifetime. And you've been doing an amazing job manifesting your path as an astrologer. You're just doing an incredible job with that. And so with this moon in Scorpio, you know, we get to work on this idea around manifestation and bringing, you know, things. And it's not the new moon. I get it, right? I get it. It's not the new moon. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the full moon illustrates what, like, we might be turned on by, or, you know, where we want to put our energy, where we want to put our desire. And what's interesting about this full moon is that, you know, Saturn and Pluto tend to be really, especially Capricorn, really earthbound and, you know, kind of built into these structures, so these kinds of corporocratic and cultural structures. But there's also, again, it's wide, that trine with Neptune. And now we're moving into kind of more of a, you know, kind of a spiritual, flowing, artistic, creative, emotional, deep place. So I do like this moon a lot. Mm-hmm. And it's at the final degrees of Scorpio, which puts it right in that Cancerian. It's in that Cancerian decan. So, you know, the part of this moon is also about, you know, nurturing, feeding, bonding. So at this degree, you know, what does this Scorpio moon have to show or illustrate or illuminate in your life, which you'd like to bring more in? What feeds you, what nurtures you at a very, very deep level? I think it's a great moon. I like it a lot. Somebody else agrees with me. Right on. I like that.
Yeah, they've delivered like 3 packages while we've, like 3 different delivery trucks have come separately to deliver all of my Amazon orders from the past 3 weeks while we've been talking.
So it's a big day out there for the dogs.
Yeah, so they're having an exciting time. But no, I completely agree with you with this full moon. And something else too is because the full moon's about coming back into balance, right? And so we started with the new moon in the sign of Taurus, which was focusing on our physical surroundings and what's in the here and now. So what do we have on a physical level? That Mercury conjunction to the sun, to me, feels like us analyzing, like, well, I need this, I need that, I want this much money, I want this thing, I want that thing, you know, on a more material plane. Versus the full moon, which is showing us, hey, you need to come back into balance. You need to think about what you internally need. What do you need? What do you truly and deeply need, want, and desire to feel internally safe, secure, and satisfied? What are you passionate about? And then that Neptune energy is really great for visualization. So thinking of really cultivating that desire and that really intense passion for whatever it is that you truly want, getting yourself out of your head and feeling it instead of just thinking about it, because that's not how you manifest things. I want $1 million. Like, you have to feel it. And then visualizing and painting a picture in your mind of the future and your ideal for what you truly want and how you want that to come about. I think this could be a great energy to utilize for something along those lines for people who are inclined to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. And, you know, as you were saying that, I was having this image of the moon as like the full moon is the shiny new thing, right? Do you really want the shiny new thing? You know, yeah. Or can you find something that isn't quite the shiny new thing and then put some energy into that thing, which to me, there's a lot of Cancerian energy that's like happening with this full moon, right? You got the true node in Cancer, Mars in Cancer right at the 1st degree. That moon is in the Cancerian decan or the lunar decan. So, you know, when we get into, you know, Cancer likes to rehab things, likes to refinish things, likes to find things and fix them up. So is it the shiny new thing, or is it something that you can put energy into that's been either neglected or left alone, or could use a little TLC, right? I think there's
I love that.
yeah.
That's so, it's so interesting too. This is kind of like a side note, but what you're saying is reminding me of exactly what I'm doing right. So I have my moon in Cancer, right? Pluto just stationed in opposition to my natal moon. This entire month, we've been literally taking our home and like ripping down everything and getting it down to its base, ripping out layers of wallpaper, flooring, like ripping out garbage from the backyard. It's like we have piles and piles of just old materials and we're getting it back to its core. And then we're reinvigorating it, making it new again. Like, it's very literal, Pluto in opposition to the moon. And so we're like nurturing this new home environment. And so I'm playing out that energy that way. And that's kind of what you're describing with this energy with Pluto and the moon and the Cancerian energy and all of that. I just think
yeah. I think it's a good thing. Yeah. So
if anyone else has Pluto opposing your moon, a good remedy for that, instead of going through an emotional crisis, is to tear apart your entire house. Start from scratch.
Good. That's a good plan. Good strategy.
But yeah, anyway, I kind of got off topic there, but I think this is going to be a really beautiful full moon. And following that full moon, there's not a lot of craziness going on. The sun will move into Gemini, of course, a couple days after. And Mars is actually going to be in Cancer. It's going to start squaring Chiron, and that'll actually be happening on the 23rd of May. So kind of toward the end of this lunar month. And I know you talked about that. I missed your Sunday live stream, but if you have any important bullet points about Mars square Chiron.
Yeah, I think bullet's the key word there. This is all about guns. It's all about guns, gun laws, ammo, clips. This is how I'm seeing it, because there's a big ramp up right now in terms of just what's happening on a fairly consistent basis with these events, and it's going to come to a point. It's going to come to a point where the United States is going to have to deal with the fact that I don't own a gun. I say this on my show. I don't own a gun. I'll be very clear. I do support the right to own a gun, even though I don't own one. But we're going to be coming into a time where that is not going to be considered a constitutional God-given right, okay? And we're right at the cusp of that. And this Mars square to Chiron, I feel, is going to give us some insight into that. And remember, the United States has Chiron and Aries natally at 20 degrees in the 4th house. Mm-hmm. So it's going to go through another Chiron return, before it moves out of Aries. And then when it hits that Chiron return at 20 degrees, we might be having a very, very different discussion about things. So anyway, that's how I see this Mars Chiron square. Mm-hmm. The other thing too with this Mars Chiron square is that Mars represents male energy, right? Male energy, masculine energy. Mm-hmm. And men have really been under, they've been in the firing line. Men have been in the crosshairs for a while now. And this Mars Chiron square should be interesting because I think men are starting to wake up in a way that is not, okay, because the media would like to paint a picture of white toxic masculinity, mm-hmm. right? This is going to be a meme and a theme moving forward. But I do believe that there are men that are waking up that are striving to find layers of accountability, responsibility, and balance that with being open and being communicative and really trying to shed this heavy duty kind of mantle of what it supposedly was to be a man, along with shedding this heavy duty mantle of, okay, I went the other direction and I did my best to be a woman, and that's not working either. And I feel like this Mars Chiron square is going to give us some insight into that. Mm-hmm. And we're in an interesting time around all this stuff. It's really fascinating. Like, welcome to Earth 2019, where almost every hot button issue, from racism to sexism to fascism to political dogmatism, it's all there. It is all out there. and we're getting to see it play out. And really the best thing you can do is to not react reflexively and see where you kind of fit in all of this stuff, right? Some of you may agree with and some of you may not agree with. You know, it's not all one size fits all. So very interesting times we're in, and I do like this full moon a lot. I think it's got a lot of promise to it. Mm-hmm. And I really do hope we get a bit of a break here, because these last 2 weeks have been very, very intense and putting people through the ringer on a lot of levels. Yeah, absolutely. And it does seem like it's going to lighten up a little bit, but yeah, that Mars Chiron could be a little interesting, especially with gender issues and male-female relations and all of those things that you were kind of talking about. And yeah, yep. We'll see what comes up around that time. The other thing too, I just wanted to bring this up really quickly, and this gets into this weird kind of male-female thing, mm-hmm. where they've just allowed basically men to compete across the board in all female sports, as long as they identify as being women. Yeah. You know about this? This is a big deal. This is the Mars. I think this is another aspect of this Mars Chiron square. Like, yeah. Who's a man? What's a man? Who's a woman? I mean, if I had a daughter, and I spent a lot of time, like, you know, bankrolling my daughter's athletic activity or athletic career path or arc or whatever, and all of a sudden I saw this influx of dudes come in and identify as women or girls, I'd be upset. I hate to say it. I'd be upset. And not only that, but men are just physically different than women. Let's say you know, because did you ever play field hockey? Did you ever play field? So that's generally a women's sport, right? Field hockey. And I know that there are feisty women that play field hockey. It's a contact sport. Men have never played field hockey, but now you've opened the door for men to come in and start, or young men to come in and start playing these sports. And there could actually be real physical threats, I think, because of the disparity of size, muscle mass, and strength. And if I was a father or I was a mother and I saw this and my daughter was involved in athletics, you know, with young girls, I'd be upset. And I think we're gonna start to see some very interesting and very heated debates around this. Yeah. And not everybody's going to agree. And it'll be interesting. I mean, even Martina Navratilova, you know, who is one of the great tennis players and icons of sport in the 1970s. And, you know, she, you know, held the banner for LGBTQ. She came out and said, well, I don't think this is fair. And a very small minority shut her down very quickly. Mm-hmm. She wasn't able to really stand by what she said. She had to kind of retract her statements. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. And I think that's going to be the other side of this kind of male-female dynamic with the Mars Chiron square. Yeah, I mean, you make a good point there, because a man, or like, so somebody who's born biologically male and goes through puberty as a male is going to have an influx of testosterone and different muscle mass and different levels of strength, versus a biological female who goes through puberty as a female who's not going to have that influx of testosterone. And if a female were to take testosterone and compete in an all-female sport, she would be disqualified because she's taking drugs, she's taking testosterone. So, I mean, although it's a naturally occurring form of testosterone, it's arguably a similar thing, right? Because right. There's more testosterone, there's going to be more strength, and they're going to have an advantage over these females. So there is a real biological question here. You know, even if they identify as women and they're taking estrogen, they still have more testosterone, they still went through puberty, they still, you know, have more muscle mass just naturally. And so is that fair, right? That's why we have women's sports and men's sports, because there is a biological, physiological difference between men and women. There just is. I agree with you. I agree. There are people out there that will argue that there isn't. That's not, it's flat out wrong. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's based on nothing. Even our brains develop differently through puberty. Women get larger hippocampus with more dendritic spine density, more connections and synapses throughout the brains. We're more lateralized, which means we use more of our brains to solve problems. Men use just specific parts of their brains to solve problems. You know, we have hippocampus, which is emotional memory, is larger and more dense in women.
So we have more of an emotional memory and more of a better memory for events. Men have a slightly larger, I think, prefrontal cortex it was. So like our brains even develop differently based on the influx of estrogen and testosterone at puberty. So even on that level, we have our minds function and look different. Our bodies function and look different. And yes, you can do alterations later on to change some of those things, but some of that's going to stay there. And just taking estrogen for a few years is not going to reduce your strength to this point where the testosterone effects are not going to still be present. So yeah, there's a lot of nonsense going on.
That was really informed, Heather. That was good.
Well, I did study neuroscience in graduate school.
Heather, I have a confession. I've always wanted to tell you that you've got a really hot hippocampus.
Yeah, I know. I got a great hippocampus. It's that's moon.
Yeah. No, that was good. That was great. And you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, it doesn't get more laid out than that, you know? So that's going to be a big topic of debate. It's going to be very interesting because that Mars in Cancer is going to run right into that true node, you know, about 3 weeks after this. So that'll be interesting to witness, that Mars true node conjunction opposite South Node in Capricorn. I just wonder if people are going to get just sick and tired of the nanny state. I mean, that's what I'm wondering here with this Mars conjunction of the true node. It's like enough already. You know, it's like in Oregon now, they passed this law where everybody has got to have visits, in-home visits, nurses in Oregon. I mean, really? Really? Do we really need that?
Yeah.
You really need people coming into our house, making notes on how we're raising our kids? I'm sorry. I'm editorializing here a little bit. But that's what I see with this Mars conjunction.
Yeah.
True node. It's like enough already. We can take care of ourselves. You know, we're informed. We're grown-ups. We're not children. You know? Go find some other country to invade somewhere and be their nanny state for a while. I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, I know I'm fed up with the nanny state. So I'm sure I'm not the only one who is sick of all the bureaucracy and all the hoops and all of the, like, just it feels like it's encroaching and moving to a different place. I talked to you about this off camera, but I lived in Texas and I lived in Arizona. These are two very hands-off states when it comes to just meddling in your personal life. And then we moved to Colorado, and yeah, there's a great infrastructure. Everything's well taken care of. There's a good social welfare system that's really taken care of, even friends of ours who need help. But I don't think it needs to be state-run. I think it could be privatized and it could function better, but that's a whole different topic, and that's just my opinion. But the trade-off, like we were talking about before, is that there's so much more bureaucracy here. It's like, it's mind-boggling. Every little thing that we do is like 10 steps more than any other state we've ever lived in. And like, I just don't want to I'm not going to register anything anymore. I don't even care. I'm sick of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, it is a bit of a thing going on. But anyway, I feel like we've talked a lot about the astrology. Do you have any final thoughts about what's going on right now?
Oh, I do, but they're so politically incorrect, I'll keep my mouth shut.
I feel like we've done enough politically incorrectness for today, probably.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we try to be fair and balanced, and you know, and I think we've talked about personal stuff, and you know, I don't go off into woo very much, and I know a lot of people are really into woo, and you know how this is going to happen, and it's all going to be wonderful, and you know we tap into this, and you know, but you and I get together, we're a couple of Virgos, you know, we roll up our Virgo sleeves, and it's like we're living in a time where with you know Saturn and Pluto and Capricorn and Jupiter is going to come into the mix. It's all about responsibility and what you're going to do and how you're going to live your life and how you're going to, you know, manage your personal starship here. And there are no quick fixes. And you may, and I think we're now like, I'm going to use you as an example. Okay. You are one of the hardest working people I know. And you started off as my student, and now you are wildly successful. Right? You did not get there because one day you decided to become an astrologer. You work your ass off. You work every day. You work really, really hard. You're always consistent with your videos, your YouTubes. You're conscientious. See, this is what we're talking about, right? If you want to get someplace, It's not just about, you know, putting a word behind your name. The reality of the world that we're living in right now is you got to work towards these things. It's not just going to happen magically. The fifth dimension is not just going to open up and pour through your pineal gland. And if it does, great. Do something with it, right? So we're living in a time of accountability and responsibility and working towards it. This is where it's at. And it's really defined by Pluto and Capricorn, Pluto and Capricorn and Saturn and Capricorn. And that may change in 2025 when everything's different. But right now, roll up your sleeves. That's where it's at.
So you don't think that aliens are going to come and we're going to all ascend into the and we'll be saved by whatever alien race they're going to say that's going to save us now? No. I totally think we're all just going to ascend and everything's going to be
no. I have a kind of an ongoing loving debate with somebody very dear to me who is really invested in ascension. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's your part of the story. That's not my part of the story. You know, I'd rather, you know, make my life here work, mm-hmm. and you know, be kind of an image of what life would be like on earth as it is in heaven. I mean, that's what you know, but this person's a Pisces, and you know, they come from a very different kind of mindset, and God bless her, you know, and I think that there's room enough for vision, right? There's room for vision. There's room for dreamers. Mm-hmm. There's room for artists. There's room for Imagineers, right? I think that we need that stuff. And I think for me, it's got to have some traction. It's got to have a little traction about being here. It's a really funny story. We were driving on our way to San Angelo over on the weekend. And I don't know if you ever went through this town, but there's a town called Eden in Central Texas. You ever run across this place? Mm-hmm. It's a little town called Eden. It's right outside of Brady, which is outside of Mason. Okay, so there's your reference points, which is outside of Fredericksburg. So as we're headed towards Eden. I'm saying, hey, you know what? I'm gonna drop you off in Eden so you can wait for the ascension. You can hang out in Eden. So we get to Eden, right? And do you know what the biggest attraction, the centerpiece of Eden was?
What?
A detention center. I swear to God. Right in the middle of town. It's like, what is this place? You know, it's this big complex, you know, with razor wire and cyclone fencing. It's a freaking detention center. And I thought, isn't that fascinating? You know, right in the center of Eden. You know, it's like,
that's interesting.
Yeah. Look, I do think at some point, this is a little bit off topic of astrology, but I do think at some point we're going to move into a world where it will be split. I just feel like that's where it's going. And the choices you make now and the how you treat yourself and treat others, they're all going to matter. Everything is going to matter. Don't think it doesn't matter. It does matter, right? Because at some point, there's going to be a parsing of our worlds. And it may not be ascension-like, but your people are going to either have to choose or there'll be some kind of bifurcation. And who you are and how you evolve your thoughts and feeling will determine kind of where you are along that spectrum. So that's how I think. That's how I see the future and where we're heading.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And like, we do need kind of both ends too. We need the dreamers and the woo-woos and the people that can have the visions. And we need the people that can take those visions and turn them into action. And sometimes people have a little bit of both. And sometimes you have one and the other and they can pair up and they can work together. And I think there's a way where it doesn't need to be completely split. But you know, there's a way to work with it. There's a way to work with both of those energies for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with you. You and I are on the same scroll. We're on the same page. Same chapter in the book of life.
That's Jupiter and Neptune versus Saturn and Pluto.
Well, you know, with Saturn and Pluto, there's that sextile with Neptune going on.
Exactly. So we can visualize something and make it into reality right now. And I think that's
absolutely.
It's just you have to take personal responsibility for what's going on in your life and for how you are contributing to what's going on out there, because we're all contributing in one way or another, either by playing into the system or enabling it to happen. And that's something that we all need to look at too, that I think is hugely important.
Totally agree. And I think the one thing that people are really up against is overwhelm.
Yeah.
So like, where do I start? Where do I begin? There's so much going on. I don't know what to do. But sometimes the world is not that complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that complicated. Maybe the simplest thing you could do would be to go down to the nursery and buy a pot and get some dirt and stick a plant in there and love it and watch it grow in either fruit or flower, right? I mean, really basic, simple, fundamental stuff. And that gets you out of overwhelm. Anytime the world gets too chaotic or too, weirded out or whatever, just simplify it. Do something that's simple. Make it more concrete, tangible, and real. And I that could be your touchstone, right? Mm-hmm. And I think everybody's got something to contribute here. Yeah. And even if you're an asshole, you've got something to contribute, right? You get to show other people what it's like to not be an asshole. So we love the assholes of the world.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, on that note, I think this is a good place to leave off. I'm going to go see how many packages are piled up outside my door.
Go tend to your empire, Heather.
Yeah. Go tear down some more wallpaper or something. But yeah, thank you so much for coming back on. I don't know if you're going to be able to post this on your channel. Are you still in the YouTube jail right now?
Yeah, for a little while, but I'm starting a new channel soon.
Okay, so I'll post the link to your channel.
New channel, new website, whole 9 yards.
Okay, so I'll post a link to your channel and all that. So subscribe to Robert's channel if you like this talk. Subscribe to my channel if you like this talk, because we do this normally every month. And thank you again so much for coming back on and getting back together. I always love doing this. This is actually one of my favorite things that I do each month, because we get to talk about just completely different stuff than I normally talk about. And if you want to yell at us down in the comment section, that's fine too.
Come over to my channel and yell at me. I'll tell you, get off my lawn. Get off my lawn.
All right. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Heather. Have a great day.
You too.